Good afternoon, everybody. So we're getting ready. So welcome to this session on GDPR and Salesforce. My name is Conor Lawlor. I'm here with Yasmine, who's from our EMEA Legal Counsel. So basically, anything that I tell you, you can't rely on. Anything that she tells you, you can from a legal perspective. So there's the fear of God in her in case I say something that could be construed as legal advice. But Yasmine's going to go through that, and I'll talk about some of the technical controls and policies that we can put in place on the platform to help you on your journey to GDPR compliance. Okay? So for those of you, which I'm assuming everybody in the audience is probably extremely familiar with one of our favorite slides, but basically this means Salesforce is a publicly traded company. Any purchasing decisions you make should be based upon technology that's currently available today. From a good news perspective, we're not trying to sell anything, and with that, I'm going. I will be making some forward-facing statements at the end, but I will explicitly point them out again. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Yasmine.
Thanks, Conor. So, hi, as Conor mentioned, I am Yasmine Charafeddine, and I am part of Salesforce's privacy legal team. And I am here because no talk on GDPR would be complete without a little bit of a quick legal intro. So you may have heard of something called GDPR. I know certainly at Salesforce, the legal team has never been so popular. So GDPR, it's a new law. It comes into play on the 25th of May this year. And it is actually really important because the current laws, privacy laws we have in place in Europe, date back to 1995, and as you can imagine, I'm sure they're nowhere near good enough to govern the type of amazing technology we have in place today. As well, back then they were directives, so each country could implement the law as they sort of saw fit. So, for example, Germany, very extreme privacy laws comparison to other countries. So really what the GDPR seeks to do is it's a true legislation, not a directive. So it really streamlines one data protection law across Europe. I think this point is the one I really want to highlight, and I get a lot of questions around this. Oh, hey, I'm a US company, so actually GDPR doesn't apply to me. Actually, it really does. It's a global law. If you are selling goods or services to any person in Europe, so a data subject in Europe, then, or indeed if you track their behavior, for example, through cookies, then GDPR absolutely will apply to you. It's no surprise. It really, the whole purpose of it is to really give people in Europe, and data subjects, individuals, stronger privacy rights, and indeed it makes companies, it forces companies to become more transparent and accountable with some hefty fines as well. So just moving along. Oh, you've got it. Perfect. So let's look at some of the increased rights that data subjects have. So is that better? So a data subject can ask a controller, and let's be clear here what that is. The controller is Salesforce's customers. They can ask you for information like, do you have my personal data? So do you process my personal data? What purposes do you use my personal data for? And indeed, who has access to it? So, they're really trying to get at third parties who might have access to their personal data. The GDPR also explains about the legal basis upon which data can be processed. So, consent is a really big one, but it's also worth noting that there are a number of other bases that you can rely upon, although for digital marketing, consent is really important, obviously. So let's look at a couple on here on the screen. So what can they ask controllers to do? So they can ask you to stop processing my data. So that's restriction of processing. They could ask you to delete their data altogether. So right to be forgotten, where there's been a lot of noise around that. They could ask you to give them a copy of their data or to amend it. And that's data portability up here. And by the way, when you give it back to them, it has to be in a really helpful machine-readable format, like a CSV file or something. They're also, of course, always interested to know about the security and how you secure their data. And then, at the end of the day, Salesforce really does welcome GDPR. We see it as a way of putting the customers at the center of everything we do. And I guess the biggest challenge for a lot of customers or companies is that they didn't design their systems with the customer at the center of what they do. So it's very hard for them to honor some of these really extensive data subject rights that the GDPR now enforces. And so with that, I'm going to hand over to Conor to explain how Salesforce can help you on your GDPR compliance journey.
Great, thanks, Yasmine. So as Yasmine kind of alluded to, that while we're talking about in context of Salesforce and how we can help you with your journey, a lot of businesses have a lot more than Salesforce involved, and depending on where they're storing the data, they still have to worry about things like consistency, control, transparency, and government around all data. But Salesforce will allow you to create a kind of a customer-centric framework, and you may look at some of the stuff I'm going to show you, in the forthcoming slides around, how you can manage consent and intent, and perhaps you could use that to extend into other areas of the business, or you may want to, migrate stuff that's currently, living in spreadsheets and, Access and SQL databases, and it may be a good fit to move onto the platform. To use this as an opportunity to do that, because it'll give you the governance around all that data that's out there that is applicable to GDPR. So, just like everybody in the audience and your companies, Salesforce has been on a journey to GDPR compliance as well, because, as Yasmine said, like our customer, we store information about our customers in Europe in it. So we've had to, ensure that we're compliant by the 25th of March, just the exact same as everybody in Europe or anybody dealing with European data. And, we've gone through the various different things with defining the scopes and looking at the solutions that we've rolled out to the customers. We're going to talk about some of the stuff we brought out in the spring release, to help you with things around managing the individual object. And then finally, there's a couple of things that are left out that have to come up to be in place by the 25th of May. So what I'm going to kind of cover in this presentation is our current capabilities, some of the new features that came out in Spring 18, just in case you're not aware of it, and then the roadmap and possible approaches to things like the right to be forgotten and the restriction of data processing. Just to manage expectations, this is by no means the only method of going around handling this. It's just a suggested approach. So from a current platform functionality in regards to, if users sign up for a trial org and they put customer data in it and the org expires, what currently happens? Basically, after 30 days, that org goes into a deleted process. If in the unlikely event that we do have, if a customer decided, heaven forbid, to move off the Salesforce platform and their org expires, again, it would be 120 days before that data, both customer data and metadata, is deleted. Now, there may still be some digital trace on like backup media throughout that, but that's literally the period of time it takes before your data is physically delivered off our production servers. So one of the key things is about data portability, and this is something that actually Salesforce, was almost perfectly prepared for, because it's something that we're extremely good at. We've been doing it for 19 years. And again, it's the ability to import or extract data out of your Salesforce instance. So it could be something as simple as, delivering a report, or else you can use ETL tools, things like the data loader, or API access to get that data in and out. And again, the typical formats with which you can exfiltrate that data is CSV, JSON, and XML. And again, this is the kind of formats that are required for compilation, for the regulation, so that it can be consumed by other systems as well. So next thing is about controlling, contact preferences, consent, and intent. So previously, out of the box, we had these capabilities, the likes of do not call, do not, email, fax opt-out, if anybody's still using the fax machine. And, with the Marketing Cloud connector, it automatically acknowledged that if you had those various settings to be put into place. But what we'd also seen is certain customers, extending this out through the likes of custom objects and custom fields to manage different preferences. And some of them may have even wanted to be prepared well in advance of the regulation and implemented their own processes for things like the right to be forgotten and the right to restrict processing. So, and again, they can define those preferences on a per channel basis. So again, depending on which channel you're contacting the customers, they may have different preferences. So, couple of key things with regards to the right to be forgotten. And we're going to show you a suggested methodology in a moment. But, the kind of key points is, while people are very worried about implementing the right to be forgotten, the idea of, being able to press the big red button and basically deleting all information about the user, you have to look at it from kind of a two-pronged approach. While it's important to be able to remove them if they request to be forgotten, it's also equally important to validate the person looking to be forgotten as well, okay? So again, you need to have different steps put in place to authenticate that it is the person that wants to be forgotten is not being the subject of social engineering, for example, that I could ring up and say, hi, I'm Yasmine, can you please forget me? And if I push the button, there's a big problem there. So, you need to have controls and mechanisms in maybe multiple factors of verification before you do it. The other thing is that you're all probably aware of is that you can't delete users in Salesforce, okay? So obviously you can deactivate them, but deactivating them still keeps the information about them there. So we have a couple of things to be, for external users, there's no problem. I can come in and obfuscate the user details, deactivate you, nullify some fields, change your email address, and so on and so forth. But for internal users, if I try to deactivate you, I'll get a change verification. And again, currently, as of today, obviously this could potentially be an issue in regards to that it can't be automated, because you have to ring Salesforce support and say, can you deactivate the change verification notice while I deactivate certain users? So if an employee comes back to you and says, actually, can you basically delete me from your instance of Salesforce? I'm no longer working for you. I don't want you storing information about me. You may have to invoke this, okay? And there is also things with regards to the option of getting to restrict viewing user details is a permission that can be turned on or off by Salesforce. And again, you can use permission sets to allow that. So if you don't want certain users to see user information about other users within your instance of Salesforce, that can be implemented as well. So the next thing is the right to restrict processing. And this is typically invoked when, say, for example, you're in a dispute with a service provider or something like that. So maybe, I don't know, one of your utility providers, you go and tell them actually you have an issue over a bill or something, and you say, while we're currently in dispute, I don't want you to process my data, i.e. don't call me, don't market to me, and so on and so forth. We are actually taking quite a conservative approach to this, because the do not process will actually mean the exfiltration of that data put on file storage on one of your internal systems while the dispute is in process. Once it's all resolved, we can bring that data back in. So that's one of the recommendations. Something I would say to be kind of aware of would be, rather, depending on the history of that user or that data subject, you may just want to obfuscate them and bring the real data out, then obfuscate them, because if you want to, when you re-import it, it makes more sense to do an upsert than creating a brand new record. So with regards to consent and preferences, what we brought out in this individual object came in the spring 18 release. Again, you just go to settings and turn this on. The idea of the individual object was to represent the data subject's privacy preferences. And again, we have some standard kind of preferences included in that, but the idea is that it would be extensible as well. And again, it'll also give partners and customers the building blocks for implementing this kind of stuff. It is packageable. And again, the kind of standard stuff would be, do not market, do not profile, but you can also do the field history tracking and make that as granular as you wish. So what's new about it? It is a new standard object. So the good news is it doesn't count against your storage. Once invoked, you actually create a relationship between this individual object and your lead and contact and person account, depending what way you're using it. And as I say, it can be associated via Apex and SOCL with users. And again, it can also be related to multiple custom objects as well. So what exactly it can do, as I said, look up, fairly straightforward stuff. It is packageable, so you'll see the likes of ISV partners rolling out solutions to work with it. At the moment, it doesn't support record types, and it also doesn't support merge and dedupe. So something to be aware of when you're rolling it out. When you turn it on, it's not automatically going to start creating individual objects from your existing account to contacts. You do have to actually do that yourself, whether through Apex scripts, or I've seen some people use the data loader to exfiltrate their existing information and match the IDs and re-import them. Now, because it has a name field on it, you may want to be, and obviously if you've got a large number of customers, you're going to have duplicate names there. You may want to, before you start implementing it, you may want to define a naming convention to keep that consistent. You'll also need to have, whether it's Apex triggers or processes and all that, to move that through the life cycle when a lead comes in and gets converted to an opportunity in contact and so forth, so that individual is always related to the correct objects. So, as I said, the main thing to go about it is, turning on the preferences. It's fairly simple to do, and then actually go in and adding the individual object to the screen's layouts for the leads and contacts and so on. So with regards to our roadmap and approach to the right to be forgotten as well, Spring 18 also the ability to selectively delete information from the field audit trail and field history. And also, so by extension, if any of you guys are using the big objects as well, which actually the field history it runs on as it happens, is you can actively, selectively delete information from big objects too. So when an account wants to be forgotten, you can use that account ID to cascade down and take that information out as requested. So we talk about things like the different approaches to the right to be forgotten. Typically, there is a certain amount of pre-work. So for example, you're going to set an attribute that the customer has invoked that they wish to be forgotten. And then at this point, we look at things like, how you're going to handle it. So one of the options could be you could have them come into your community or any portal or even a website and invoke it themselves and verify themselves that they are who they say they are, at which point the whole process could potentially be automated. Or else then, you could have them filling out forms and you might require human intervention for the verification. So once verified, then we come along here and we basically deploy the trigger for the right to be forgotten, which will start, basically deleting the records as required. On the right-hand side here, we are looking at bringing in an event type specifically for this so that it's using platform events to invoke that request. So again, that could be the right to be forgotten, could be triggered from other systems as well. So it's not just Salesforce. So think of it in the broader ecosystem of your IT landscape. And that's something, as I said, that's on the roadmap for summer 18. And then at which point, obviously, is there a user record? We have to deactivate them, obfuscate it, and then start deleting the accounts and contacts. Another question we often get asked is in regards to what is identifiable information. So for example, the aggregate data of things like of related information that once you delete the contact information, do you need to delete? And the recommendation is if it has no reflection or no association with the individual, you can still use that for analytical purposes, so long as it's not identifiable. So a next thing we look at a similar approach to the right to restrict processing, which I kind of discussed earlier. But again, if the user wants to come in and specify that they wish to restrict processing, verification equally as important, and it's more or less a carbon copy up to this point as the right to be forgotten. But then we have to signal that we need to extract the data, store it somewhere, deactivate the user, and then depending on what event happens, if we become friends again, to re-import them, and it's business as usual. So this is very much going to be, with Yasmine standing here beside me, forward-looking statements, safe harbor, and all that. This may or may never happen, but a lot of it will. So possible. The Summer 18 feature is in regards to introducing a method to standard methods to nullify things like user records, anonymize fields like that. So all this kind of functionality that everybody requires, we're going to kind of procedurize it, for want of a better term, and suppress email, change verification. So that's one of the key things that we will want in place by summer 18 in regards to having to ring Salesforce to suppress that notification every time. It's not good for the end user, it's not good for us, because people will be answering the phone and turning it on and turning it off. And again, the automated cascade delete of associated records on the contact and the individual, if that can be automated as well, because a lot of stuff to a certain extent will be standardized with the ability to further configure it to meet your business needs. And then, so the platform events was the other thing that in regards to basically the layer of abstraction, implementing that as to whether it gets triggered by Salesforce or whether it gets triggered by another system. It just makes sense. A platform event is an excellent fit for this type of functionality. And again, the idea is that it would be used in lieu of Apex triggers. So whatever way you want to subscribe to it, because as I mentioned previously, it may want to cascade deletions from more systems than Salesforce. This is the other one that we don't know whether it's going to be kind of prioritized or not in regards to the exfiltration and the restoration of that data. But basically, it's building a process out, saving you the trouble of having to do it, because obviously, if you're operating in a business where process restriction is coming into place, it may make absolute sense to automate that to ensure that there's no human intervention required, because obviously somebody will forget to do something. So the idea is to do that, but also be able to point it at where the extract lives for the re-importation of that data. So that was a very quick overview in regards to what it does. So I'm taking easy questions. Yasmine's taking legal ones. And sorry, this lady was first there.
There was a slide I saw on Twitter last week that said that Process Builder was not available on the individual object. Has that now changed, because that wasn't on that slide now?
I would have to double check for fear of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
No, it's not available. Or lightning page layouts, because it's not in
No.
the schema and that's part of the Apex.
So that means that every single person, company that is required to be GDPR compliant is going to have a developer implement code. Now, you've provided the code. Again, I saw a tweet about that last week.
Oh.
But how many unscrupulous developers out there are there going to be? They're going to say, charge people, thousands and thousands of dollars to get them GDPR compliant, because they have to have code to get their continuing data into the individual object, other than manually retyping first name, last name, and all the references again. It's a really just absolutely unbelievable that you haven't allowed declarative options for this important tool.
Yeah. So from the declarative option to get yourself, as I said, the data loader, to get the initial one, yeah. And I would, again, for fear of saying something that may not happen, I will go and check to see when. It doesn't make sense for the individual object not to be available in the process builder, because obviously to trigger that to happen declaratively makes absolute sense, okay? So whether just because on the first release it didn't happen, let me take that away.
But it's just, got to be compliant by that date.
Yeah.
And therefore, if you are saying that the individual object is the way to be compliant.
No, we're not saying that.
Right.
Yeah. We're saying.
And that was probably another question, because
Yeah.
you could easily just put all those fields on the contact and the lead object and still be compliant.
Oh, yeah, no, it's a way of saving you having to replicate those attributes on contacts, on leads, and all, replicating the work, replicating how you want to react to a change of events on them. So that's what the purpose of it is there. And the main thing is, because it gives you that layer of abstraction, it also doesn't count against your storage, and it's extensible. Now, I appreciate your point, and I suppose we'll take it away. I suppose it's the best option rather than telling you something that's incorrect. Sorry, you were next.
I've asked this sort of left and right just to get everyone's thoughts on it. How are we going to be able to demonstrate to our customers in layman terms that we've forgotten them if you can't find them?
Don't answer the phone by name.
Yeah.
The certificate of deletion, though.
But is that something we could give them at point of call, but then like in 3 years' time, if they feel that we haven't complied, how can we prove them? No, we really did if we can't find them in the system.
I don't know.
I mean, in terms of the kind of process of deletion, for example, with Salesforce, I don't know if you've heard of our Spark documents. Yeah, so they have a really good section, which even I can understand, on return of customer data and deletion of customer data. And these are actually contractual commitments, so they're tied into your agreements with us, if you're our customers. But, so my point is, it is available clearly online how we would go through and do the process, so very transparent there, which is important. I guess, you could ask for a certification of deletion. I've actually, our agreements talk a little bit about that, and indeed some of model clauses talk about that. So you could ask that sales for something, and we could, I don't know, maybe it'll come to my team to put an email in place. It's an interesting point. The model clause discuss it, so it's something we're aware of, and I'll take that back to my team. But I think it would be fine. Maybe an email from Salesforce's legal team confirming that. No.
It's great at points
Oh,
in
okay.
time, but once that data's been nullified
Okay.
or whatever, how can you find that data? It's made to be anonymous, but then because it's anonymous, you can't find it to then retrospectively prove that you've done it.
Yeah.
If someone
You can store the
still identifiable. That's what I'm just.
But for record deletion, I believe you can.
So that's allowed. Possibly. Well, that would be fine. You know, if there was, it's just the question I've been asking everywhere to try and see what people are thinking generally about.
We could ask one lawyer and he said you could, but no more than themselves.
No, that's fine. Yeah, just want to know what everyone's thoughts are.
I think to amplify that, basically, keep about someone to recall the fact that you deleted them.
Yeah. So,
I think this is where things
sorry.
change.
Well, sorry, Dermot. Yeah.
Once you've created an individual object and you've linked a lead to it or a contact to it, and you've started storing preferences like do not market, do not contact, does that actually enforce that in other Salesforce products? So it doesn't
No,
actually prevent it happening. So you have to update your code to take it.
Correct. That's a good question, because it is actually it is just an attribute, and you have to enforce that attribute dependent on that. So it's not a magic bullet. And again, the whole thing is that it's up to you to ensure that you're compliant. We can only help you build the processes and facilitate it.
So this is just fields, it's not process.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, there's a lady down the back for a second. Yeah.
The holiday's still cancelled.
Motivation is loads of talk about turning off the email because someone who wants to be removed from system. If they work for you, surely the email address will be within the system and it will be in your network. And even if they did receive an email, surely it be evidence that you've gone through that process. Sorry, just a little statement putting it out there. The other thing is scenario. We have a customer. They've rung up, said delete me, and we've done great work, fantastic process. Everything's anonymised. We've kept everything that's legally required to keep regarding transactions, etc. And when we've got a fantastic salesperson in another part of the business that comes across them and adds them back in as a lead, and you've got no visibility that that person has said do not contact me, and they go right back into the process again.
Yeah.
But is that not where the informed consent comes in? The fact that
Yeah, I mean,
that
that's
Yeah,
your
that-
back to
yeah.
step one, right?
Yeah.
You're going to need to get the consent to be able to.
But if they're really angry that you're not meant to contact them and someone rings them up, we've got nothing in there to say don't call this person, they've not given consent.
Yeah, but if you,
Yeah, but you will have
It-
That's what
Yeah,
we're going
yeah,
to be putting
okay,
in place.
yeah.
Yeah.
in order to contact
It's
them.
not even
Also
by
topic
this.
for conversation. That you will have
Yeah.